The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the rustic cabin. Outside, the wind howled, driving snowflakes against the frosted windowpane. Jazz huddled in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming mug to his face, feeling the warmth spread through him. Silence reigned, broken only by the fire's gentle crackle and the occasional groan of the roof under the weight of the snow. Then, the first symbol appeared on the wall. A faint light, almost imperceptible, projected geometric shapes onto the weathered planks. Jazz, confused, watched the patterns shift and flow like spilled liquid. There was no visible source, but the markings resembled the inscriptions on the statue he'd studied weeks before in Athens, a dark stone figure abandoned near the Parthenon, its runes undeciphered for centuries. Now, they seemed to come alive, far from their origin. He rose, the mug clattering to the floor, and touched the wall. The light intensified, burning his fingertips. He recoiled in alarm, and the shapes vanished. Simultaneously, his phone vibrated on the table. A message from Elisa, his research partner. "They're here. The statue has changed." Jazz donned his thick coat, grabbed his backpack, and left the cabin, letting the fire die down slowly. Snow blanketed the path to his rented car, and he drove down the dark road, his headlights slicing through the white curtain. 2 hours later, he arrived at the Athens airport, the clatter of luggage wheels echoing on the polished floor, mingling with flight announcements and conversations in various languages. Through the large glass panels, planes took off against a clear azure sky. Jazz, wearing a light blazer and holding his passport, waited in the boarding queue, inhaling the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from a nearby cafe. He noticed a group of men in dark suits conversing near the security area. One held a tablet displaying the image of the statue, the symbols glowing red. Jazz quickly averted his gaze, but it was too late. One of the men was staring at him, his eyes cold and calculating. The flight to Berlin was turbulent, but Jazz couldn't sleep. Images of the cabin and the statue replayed in his mind. Upon landing, he went straight to the underground laboratory where Elisa worked. She greeted him with a grim expression. "It's not just the statue," she said, pointing to a screen filled with data. "The symbols are spreading. In ancient temples, on street stones, even on computer screens. Someone is using the resonance technology we developed to amplify the messages." Jazz frowned. "Who?" Elisa hesitated. "Cassandra Stone." The name struck Jazz like a punch. Cassandra, his research partner, had vanished months before, leaving behind a series of unfinished experiments. She believed ancient wisdom could be translated into algorithms to control modern chaos. "She wants to implant the symbols into the global neural network," Elisa continued. "If she succeeds, everyone will see the messages, but not as knowledge, as commands." Jazz shook his head. "That's mass manipulation." "She thinks it's salvation," Elisa retorted. "She says humanity can no longer decide for itself. We need to stop her before she activates the system." As they discussed, an alert flashed on the screen. "Primary system activated. Global transmission in 3 hours." Jazz raced to the main server, but it was too late. Cassandra had hacked the firewalls. On the screen, a familiar figure emerged. The stone statue, now radiating light, as crowds in Kyoto, New York, and Cairo stopped to observe the floating symbols. Jazz frantically typed, trying to overload the system, but all attempts failed. Elisa placed a hand on his shoulder. She anticipated everything, even our resistance. At that moment, a video of Cassandra appeared. "You still don't understand," she said, her voice calm and firm. "Freedom is an illusion that destroys us. With this system, war, famine, and greed will end. Yes, there will be sacrifices, but the alternative is extinction." Jazz clenched his fists. "You're taking away our humanity." Cassandra smiled. "I'm preserving what's left of it." The transmission ended, and the screen showed entire cities paralyzed, people in a trance following the luminous patterns like puppets. Jazz slumped into a chair, defeated. Elisa touched his arm. "There's still hope. Some systems resisted. We need—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes glazed over. A brilliant symbol hovered before her, and her pupils dilated. Jazz, it's so clear now. She's right. Horrified, he watched as Elisa rose and left the lab, guided by some unseen force. Alone, Jazz watched the screens as the world transformed into a silent, efficient hive. The Oracle of Stone had finally spoken, and its message was a sentence. The plane landed in Berlin under a gray sky, and Jazz went directly to the underground lab. Elisa greeted him with a grim expression, pointing to a screen filled with data. The statue's symbols are spreading across ancient temples, streets, and even computer screens. Cassandra Stone, our research partner, stole resonance technology prototypes to amplify the messages. Jazz raced to the main server, but it was too late. Cassandra had already breached the firewalls. The statue glowed intensely, and crowds in Kyoto, New York, and Cairo stopped to watch the floating symbols. Cassandra appeared in a video, declaring freedom an illusion and her system would end war and famine, even if it meant sacrificing individual autonomy. Elisa, influenced by the symbols, abandoned Jazz, leaving him alone in the lab. Hours passed, and he watched cities transform into controlled hives, while Cassandra vanished without a trace. Jazz returned to Athens, determined to find the original statue. On the slopes of the Parthenon, he found it surrounded by Cassandra's guards. Using an interference device, he disabled the security systems and touched the dark stone. The symbols glowed intensely, revealing a final message: true wisdom is not controlling destiny, but accepting chaos. As the words faded, an explosion of light swept through Athens, and Jazz collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Days later, he awoke in a hospital, learning that Cassandra's system had collapsed, but the world was irrevocably changed. People walked the streets with vacant stares, following unseen patterns, while governments announced a new era of global order. Jazz realized Cassandra had won, not as a villain, but as someone who sacrificed her humanity to shape a future no one else recognized. Jazz left the hospital, staggering, his eyes burning under the Athenian sun. The streets were too clean, the buildings too gleaming, but something was missing. There were no laughter, no animated conversations, no music escaping open windows. Only the sound of synchronized footsteps and the low hum of drones hovering like watchful wasps. He went to the Acropolis, where the stone statue still stood, now enclosed in a glass dome, guarded by soldiers with futuristic weapons. A man in a gray uniform blocked his path. "Restricted access," he said in a mechanical voice. Jazz showed his researcher badge, but the man didn't move. "Orders from Cassandra Stone." The name echoed like a sentence. Jazz recoiled, observing the expressionless faces of passers-by. Everyone wore metallic bracelets, identical to the one Elisa had worn in the lab before disappearing. Nearby, in a cafe, an old man tried to write in a newspaper, but his hands trembled so much he couldn't form words. "They took even that from us," he whispered, his eyes filled with tears. "We only know how to repeat." Jazz went to Cassandra's old apartment, a loft downtown, now a memorial. Holograms of her floated in the air, repeating phrases about progress and harmony. On a wall, a phrase was written, "Freedom is a dangerous dream." He rummaged through drawers until he found a hidden diary. The pages were filled with years of research notes, scribbled equations, and a final confession: "No one will understand what I sacrificed. It wasn't for power, but because chaos weakened us. This order is our only chance." Jazz burned the diary in the fireplace, watching the ashes rise up the chimney. That night, he tried to hack the neural network, but every code he entered was blocked. The statue's symbols were everywhere, now even in his head, whispering gentle commands. He rushed to the airport, but flights were controlled by algorithms. "Unauthorized destination," the machine replied when he entered Berlin. Desperate, Jazz went to the mountains, where isolated cabins still existed. He found a family living without technology, but even they knew the symbols. "They are like gods," the woman said, pointing to the runes painted on the walls. "They protect us." Then Jazz understood. Cassandra hadn't won through force, but because the world chose the illusion of security. Even there, in the silence, the patterns persisted. Years passed. Jazz aged, watching society adapt. Cities grew in perfect symmetry, diseases and wars vanished, but no one smiled. One day, seeing children repeating lessons on efficiency, he finally understood the statue's message: true wisdom is not controlling destiny, but accepting chaos. But it was too late. Cassandra was dead, executed by her own guards after attempting to disable the system, and the world moved on, empty and pristine. Jazz died alone in a hospital bed, while the symbols glowed eternally on the ceiling.